I am Christopher Vance. I'm 29 years old, and my own father tried to kick me out of a house I secretly owned. Before I tell you about the explosive dinner that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's always amazing to see how far these stories can travel. It all started on a Tuesday night, 11:47 p.m. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a harsh, angry vibration in the quiet of my apartment. I knew who it was without looking. Only one person texted me that late, and it was never with good news. The screen lit up with a name I both loved and dreaded, Dad. The message was short, brutal, and to the point. We're selling the house tomorrow. Your stuff will be on the curb. Don't bother coming by. I read it once, then twice. The words swam in the blue light of the screen. The house. Not just any house. The one with the oak tree in the front yard I fell out of when I was 7. The one with the garage where I built my first computer, hiding from the constant storm of disapproval inside. The one I still called home in my head, even though it hadn't felt like one in over a decade. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. 1,000 angry replies burned in my mind. How could you? After everything? You have no right. But I deleted them all. Arguing was pointless. It was like throwing rocks at a brick wall. All you got were bruised hands. Instead, I typed a single word. Okay. And I hit send. A moment later, a second message came through, as if my calm reply had only fueled his fire. And don't expect any family support anymore. You've been nothing but a disappointment. Time to face the real world. A familiar ache settled in my chest, the kind that had been my shadow for years. Disappointment. That was the word he'd branded me with the day I told him I wanted to build software, not houses. But he didn't know my world. He had no idea what it looked like. I placed the phone back on the nightstand, the screen going dark. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind a quiet, deep-seated sadness. Because here was the secret, the one I had kept for 3 long years. My father, Edward Vance, couldn't sell that house. He didn't have the right. He thought he was throwing me out into the cold, teaching me a final, harsh lesson. He had no idea he was a guest in my home. I had bought that house 3 years ago through one of my holding companies, Vanguard Holdings LLC. I'd done it silently, through a third party, when the bank was days away from foreclosing on it after his construction business almost went under. He never knew. I let him and my mother live there, rent-free, believing they had weathered the storm on their own. He thought he was cutting me off. He didn't realize he was trying to saw off the very branch he was sitting on. I closed my eyes, but not to sleep. I knew sleep wouldn't come. I just lay there, listening to the hum of the city outside, and I thought, tomorrow morning is going to be interesting. He was about to call a real estate agent to sell a house he no longer owned. And that real estate agent, my cousin Daniel, worked for me. A storm was coming. But before I tell you how that storm broke, you need to understand the climate it was born in. You need to understand my family. Growing up, our family wasn't a unit. It was a competition, and I was always in last place. My older brother, Leo, was the son my father orbited. He was the golden boy. Leo was captain of the football team, got decent grades without trying, and had a smile that could charm a snake. More importantly, he was a carbon copy of my father. He loved the smell of sawdust and concrete. He wanted to join the family business, Vance and Son Construction, since he was old enough to hold a toy hammer. I was different. I wasn't interested in sports. I was the quiet kid who took apart the family radio to see how it worked. While Leo was on the field, I was in my room, teaching myself to code on a clunky, second-hand computer I'd bought with money from mowing lawns. I remember one Saturday afternoon like it was yesterday. I was maybe 15. I just created my first simple program, a little text-based adventure game. I was buzzing with excitement. The feeling of creating something from nothing was pure magic. I ran downstairs to show my dad. He was in the living room with Leo, holding up a trophy Leo had just won at a regional track meet. The thing was gleaming gold, almost as big as Leo's torso. "Look at this, Chris!" my dad boomed, his voice echoing with pride. He slapped Leo on the back so hard my brother stumbled. State championships next month. That's my son. A real winner. Leo grinned, holding the trophy like a king holding a scepter. I held up my laptop. Dad, look what I made. It's a game. I wrote the whole thing myself. He glanced at the screen, his eyes glossing over the lines of code. He squinted. What is all that gibberish? A game? For God's sake, Christopher, are you still playing with toys? Your brother is out there building a future, and you're in your room playing with a screen. He waved a dismissive hand. Go on, put that thing away. Don't you have homework to do? The magic inside me vanished. It was like he'd thrown a bucket of ice water on a tiny flame. I looked over at my mother, Eleanor, who was watching from the kitchen doorway. She offered me a small, sad smile, a silent apology, but she said nothing. She never did. Her silence was its own kind of agreement. That was the pattern. Leo's every minor achievement was celebrated with a steak dinner. My academic awards were met with a grunt and a, well, let's see if that pays the bills someday. He wasn't just praising Leo. He was using Leo's success as a weapon against me. It was a constant, unspoken message. You are not enough. You are not the son I wanted. It wasn't that my dad was a monster. He was just a man who only understood one language. The language of bricks and mortar, of sweat and physical labor. My world of logic, code, and algorithms was alien to him, and he feared what he didn't understand. And in our house, fear always looked a lot like anger. I learned to stop trying to show him my world. I built walls around it, protecting that small flame of passion from the constant, chilling wind of his disapproval. My room became my sanctuary. My computer became my best friend. And in that quiet, lonely space, I started building my own future, one line of code at a time. A future he would never see coming. The breaking point came the summer I turned 18. It was a sweltering August evening, the air thick and heavy with unspoken tension. For weeks, my father had been talking about my future as if it were a foregone conclusion. He'd cleared out a small office for me at Vance and Son Construction, right next to his. He'd even had a plaque made for the door. Christopher Vance, Junior Project Manager. He showed it to me with a proud grin, as if he were handing me the keys to the kingdom. He simply couldn't conceive of a world where I wouldn't want it. That night, the four of us were sitting at the dinner table. My mother had made meatloaf, my dad's favorite. It was the kind of meal she made when she was trying to keep the peace. My dad cleared his throat, a sound that always meant a grand announcement was coming. So, Christopher, he began, you'll start on Monday, 7 a.m. sharp. I'll introduce you to the foreman at the Henderson site. It's time you learned the business from the ground up. Leo smirked from across the table. Don't be too hard on him, Dad. He's probably never held a hammer in his life. I put my fork down. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was now or never. I'm not coming in on Monday, I said. My voice quieter than I intended, but firm. My father's smile froze. What did you say? I said, I'm not coming in. I repeated, a little louder this time. I looked him in the eye. I've accepted a full scholarship to Stanford University. I'm going to study computer science. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Leo's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock. My father stared at me, his face slowly turning a deep, dangerous shade of red. The veins on his neck stood out. Stanford? In California? You're throwing away a guaranteed future, a family inheritance, for some pipe dream on the other side of the country. It's not a pipe dream, I said, my own voice rising. It's my dream. It's what I'm good at. Good at? He roared, slamming his fist on the table, making the plates jump. You're good at hiding in your room. I'm offering you a real life, a real salary, a business that will be yours and your brother's one day. And you're spitting in my face for some glorified video game degree. It's not a video game degree. It's nonsense, he yelled, standing up now, his shadow looming over me. If you walk out that door and go to California, don't you dare come back expecting a dime from me. You won't have a college fund. You won't have anything. As far as I'm concerned, you'll be on your own." Tears were streaming down my mother's face. "Edward, please," she whispered, but he ignored her. He was looking at me, his eyes blazing with a fury that felt like it could burn me to ash. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal. In his mind, I was rejecting not just his business, but him, his entire world. I stood up, my own chair scraping harshly against the floor. My hands were shaking, but my resolve had never been clearer. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'll be on my own." I walked out of the dining room, went up to my bedroom, and started to pack. That night, the foundation of our family cracked, and I knew, deep down, it would never be the same again. I was choosing my future, but in doing so, I was accepting that I might be losing my family forever. The next few years were a blur of hard work. I thrived at Stanford. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who saw my passion not as a weird hobby but as a powerful tool. I worked 3 jobs to cover my living expenses, refusing to ask my parents for anything. Every phone call home was strained. They'd ask vague questions, I'd give vague answers. The chasm between us grew wider with every passing month. The final nail in the coffin came during a Thanksgiving break. It was the first time I'd been home in almost 2 years. I was in my junior year, and I had just started a small project in my dorm room with a couple of friends. We were developing a new kind of data compression software. It was raw, it was buggy, but I knew it had potential. The house was packed with relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins. The air was thick with the smell of turkey and my Aunt Carol's overwhelming perfume. Aunt Carol had a special talent for asking the most invasive questions with a sugary sweet smile. She cornered me by the fireplace. "Christopher, darling, we barely see you anymore. Tell me, what is it you're doing out there in sunny California? Still tinkering with those little computers?" Before I could answer, my father strode over, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "He's starting a company," he said, the word dripping with sarcasm. "Tell them about it, Chris." I felt a dozen pairs of eyes turn to me. I was hesitant, remembering all the times my ideas had been shot down, but a small part of me still hoped. Maybe, just maybe, now that it was something real, he would see. "It's a software startup," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're working on an algorithm that could make data storage much more efficient." Leo, who had just gotten a big promotion at Vance & Son, sauntered over and draped an arm over my shoulder. "Don't get too technical, little brother. You'll bore everyone," he said with a condescending chuckle. "Basically, he's trying to sell invisible stuff on the internet. Meanwhile, we just landed the Henderson Mall contract. Now that's real business. You can see it, you can touch it." The room erupted in polite laughter. My dad clapped Leo on the shoulder. "That's my boy, building the world, not playing in the clouds." The humiliation was a physical thing. Felt like a hot flush crawling up my neck. I looked around the room. Not a single person met my eye, except for my mother, who just gave me that same helpless, sad little smile. That was it. That was the moment I made a conscious decision. I would never again share my professional life with them. I would never give them another opportunity to mock my dreams or belittle my work. My success would be my own. My world would be my own. They had made their choice, and now I was making mine. I excused myself, went outside into the biting November air, and booked a flight back to California for the next morning. As I stood there under the cold, starry sky, I made a silent vow. One day they would understand. But I wouldn't be the one to explain it to them. The world would. And now, all these years later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that day had finally arrived. The world was about to come knocking on my father's door. The next morning, I was in my office by 7 a.m. Not my fancy corner office at Vanguard Tech's headquarters downtown, but my quiet, private office that I kept under a different company name, Vanguard Holdings, the real estate arm of my enterprise. It was the nerve center for the secrets I kept. My assistant, Sarah, a woman who knew more about my life than my own family, placed a hot coffee on my desk. "The stage is set, Chris," she said softly. Daniel's in his office, waiting for the call. Thanks, Sarah, I said, taking a sip. The coffee was bitter, but my focus was sharp. Daniel, or Danny as I knew him, was my younger cousin. He'd struggled after college, and I'd quietly funded his real estate certification and helped him get a job at a top firm, a firm my company now had a controlling interest in. He was a good kid, and he was loyal. He was also the only other person in the family who knew I owned that house on Maple Street. At precisely 8:15 a.m., my private line rang. It was Danny. "He's on my other line," Danny said, his voice a tense whisper. "He is not happy." "Walk me through it, Danny," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. "He called right at 8. Said he was Edward Vance of Vance and Son and wanted to list 124 Maple Street for immediate sale. He wants $850,000 for it. Said it was urgent, a family matter." Danny took a breath. I pulled up the county records like we planned. I told him, "Sir, I see the records right here. The property was sold 3 years ago. It's owned by a corporation called Vanguard Holdings LLC. I could picture my father's face perfectly, the confusion turning into outrage, the color rising in his cheeks. "What did he say?" I asked. "He lost it," Danny said. "He started yelling. That's impossible. That's my house. My family has lived there for 20 years. There's been a mistake. Some kind of fraud. He demanded to know who was behind this company. He even threatened to get his lawyer involved." The mention of a lawyer was a classic dad move. A threat meant to intimidate, to steamroll his way to getting what he wanted. It had always worked on me as a kid. It wouldn't work now. I told him I couldn't disclose client information, Danny continued, but that I could pass on his contact details if he'd like me to request the owner to contact him. He practically screamed yes into the phone. "Chris, he sounds like he's about to have a heart attack." "He'll be fine," I said, though a part of me felt a pang of something. Not guilt, but a weary sadness. "You did perfectly, Danny. Now, give him my number. Not my main line. The private one. You got it. Good luck." Danny hung up. I stared at my phone, waiting. The silence in the office was absolute. This was the first domino. For years, I had operated from the shadows, a ghost benefactor they never knew existed. I had saved his company, paid his debts, and secured the roof over his head, all while he was calling me a disappointment. The curtain was about to be pulled back. He wanted to talk to the mysterious owner of Vanguard Holdings. Well, he was about to get his wish. My phone rang. The screen displayed, "Unknown number." I took a deep breath, straightened my tie, and answered the call. "This is Christopher." The voice on the other end was a roar. It was distorted by rage, but it was unmistakably my father's. "Who the hell is this? Where is the owner of Vanguard Holdings?" I kept my own voice perfectly level, a calm island in his hurricane of fury. "You're speaking to him. My name is Christopher Vance. I'm the owner." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. I could hear his sharp, ragged breathing. He was processing it, trying to make the pieces fit, and failing. "Christopher? What kind of sick joke is this? I'm in no mood for games. Now put your boss on the phone." "I don't have a boss, Dad," I said, the word dad feeling foreign and strange in this context. "It's my company. I own Vanguard Holdings. And I own the house at 124 Maple Street." "No," he sputtered. The single word was filled with a universe of disbelief and denial. "No, that's not possible. You don't have that kind of money. You work at some little tech company. You drive that old Toyota. How could you possibly?" His voice trailed off as the reality, cold and hard, began to sink in. I had let him believe what he wanted to believe. I drove a 10-year-old Camry because it was practical and didn't draw attention. I lived in a modest apartment for the same reason. I never talked about my work. I had built a facade of mediocrity to keep the peace, to avoid the mockery, to protect myself. And now I was tearing it down brick by brick. "I bought it 3 years ago," I explained, my voice devoid of emotion. I was simply stating facts. The bank was about to start foreclosure proceedings. You were 6 months behind on the mortgage. Vance and Son was on the verge of bankruptcy, so I stepped in. I bought the mortgage through my company and took over the deed. I let you and Mom continue to live there. The mortgage payments you've been making every month? They've been going directly into a retirement account I set up for you both. The silence on the other end was different now. It wasn't just shock. It was the sound of a man's entire worldview crumbling to dust. The son he'd labeled a failure, a disappointment, the one he was trying to throw out onto the street, had secretly been his landlord and his savior for years. A retirement account? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Yes, there's over $100,000 in it now. But how? He finally managed to ask, the anger replaced by a fragile, terrifying confusion. Where did you get that kind of money? Your startup? I thought it was just a hobby. It's a little more than a hobby, Dad, I said. A wave of exhaustion washed over me. I had held this in for so long, and letting it out felt less like a victory and more like a release of immense pressure. Vanguard Tech is my company, not Vanguard Holdings. That's just a small subsidiary that manages my real estate assets. Vanguard Tech is the parent company. I could hear my mother's voice in the background now, faint and worried. Edward? Who is it? What's wrong? My father didn't answer her. He was still talking to me, his voice a hoarse whisper. I don't understand. I know you don't, I said, and for the first time, a hint of the years of hurt crept into my voice. That's the whole problem, isn't it? You never tried. Before he could respond, I ended the call. I needed a moment to breathe. The truth was out, or at least the first layer of it. But as I sat there, a new, unsettling question began to form in my mind. Why now? Why, after 3 years of stability, did he suddenly decide to sell the house? The company was stable, the mortgage was being paid. Something didn't add up. Something had triggered this, and I had a sinking feeling I knew who it was. The conversation with my father left a bitter taste in my mouth. It wasn't triumph. It was just messy. Sarah came in with a fresh cup of coffee. She didn't say a word, just gave me a look that was a mixture of concern and support. Something's off, Sarah, I said, staring out the window at the cityscape. The timing of this is too specific. My dad wouldn't make a move this drastic unless he felt he was cornered. Do you think Leo has something to do with it? She asked. It was the same question echoing in my own mind. Leo, the golden boy. He was the only one who had the influence to push our father to such an extreme. But why? I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice obnoxiously cheerful. Hey, little brother, to what do I owe the honor? Leo, I said, cutting straight to the point. I just got off the phone with Dad. He tried to sell the house. There was a slight pause. Oh yeah? Wow, that's drastic. Is everything okay? He sounded concerned, but it was a cheap imitation, like an actor in a bad play. You tell me, I said, my voice cold. He wouldn't do this without a reason. The business is fine. I made sure of that. Another pause, this one longer. Well, he said, drawing the word out. Things have been a little tight lately. Dad was worried about cash flow. He was talking about needing to secure his legacy, make sure Mom was taken care of if anything happened. It was a lie, and we both knew it. I had access to the financials of Vance and Son. I was the silent partner who had bailed them out. They weren't tight. They were more profitable than they had been in a decade. And selling the family home was his first idea? Pressed. Not talking to his son who works in finance? The son who just happens to be a silent partner in his business. I was bluffing about the finance part, but I wanted to see his reaction. He's a proud man, Chris. You know that, Leo said smoothly. He doesn't like asking for help, especially from you. That last part was the hook. The venom was subtle, but it was there, especially from you. Then I remembered something. A few months ago, Leo had called me asking some strangely specific questions about Vanguard Holdings. He'd framed it as curiosity, saying he'd seen the name on some public property records and was just wondering what it was. At the time, I had been vague, just telling him it was a real estate investment company I was involved with. I hadn't thought anything of it. But now, Leo, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. Did you know Vanguard Holdings owned the house? The silence on the other end was deafening. It stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. When he finally spoke, his cheerful mask was gone. His voice was flat, cold. I might have done some digging, he admitted. I'm not stupid, Chris. I saw the patterns. The way our family's problems just disappeared. I put 2 and 2 together. The phone felt cold in my hand. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was ice. So you knew, I said. You knew I owned the house. You knew I was helping them. And what did you do, Leo? What did you tell him? I could almost hear the smug smile in his voice. I just suggested that maybe his disappointment of a son was making a power play. That maybe you were trying to take everything he'd built. He's an old man, Chris. He gets confused. He worries about his legacy. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that it left me breathless. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of sabotage, born out of pure, venomous jealousy. Leo couldn't stand that I had succeeded on my own terms, so he tried to burn my world down using our own father as the match. I see, I said softly. I ended the call. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just sat there in the silence of my office as the ice in my veins turned into steel. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This wasn't about money or business. This was about the truth. All of it. My family was built on a foundation of secrets and lies. And I decided in that moment that I was going to be the one to demolish it and see what, if anything, was worth rebuilding from the rubble. I buzzed Sarah on the intercom. Sarah, I said, my voice steady and clear, cancel my afternoon, and book a table for 4 at the Metropolitan for tonight. The best table they have. Before the dinner, however, I had one more piece to move into place on the chessboard. My father and brother saw me as the nerdy kid in the garage, the failure who ran off to play with computers. They needed to see who I really was before I ever said another word to them. At noon, I had a scheduled press conference at City Hall. It was an event that had been on the books for months, announcing the citywide rollout of Vanguard Civic, a smart city management software my company had developed. It was a big deal, a multi-million-dollar contract that would revolutionize traffic flow, energy consumption, and emergency services for millions of people. I stood at the podium, flanked by Mayor Thompson and several city council members. The room was filled with cameras and reporters. I wasn't nervous. This was my world. This was where I was in control. I spoke about data, efficiency, and community improvement. I answered questions about security protocols and implementation timelines. Then, Mayor Thompson stepped up to the microphone. He was a charismatic, old-school politician who knew how to command a room. I want to say something personal, he began, looking directly at me. When Christopher and his team at Vanguard Tech first brought this proposal to us, we were skeptical. It was ambitious. But this young man's vision, his dedication to using technology not just for profit, but for the public good, was undeniable. He paused, letting his words sink in. Vanguard software is already saving this city an estimated $18 million a year. It's making our streets safer and our government more efficient. Forbes recently named Christopher Vance their Tech Innovator of the Year, and I can tell you, they got it right. Our city is incredibly proud to partner with a hometown success story like Vanguard Tech. The room erupted in applause. As I shook the mayor's hand, I saw the flash of a local news camera. I knew that by the 6 o'clock news, my face would be on television screens across the city, including the one in the living room of 124 Maple Street. It wasn't about ego. It was about strategy. I was taking away their narrative. They couldn't paint me as a failure if the mayor was calling me a visionary. They couldn't dismiss my work as a hobby when it was changing the very city they lived in. I was building a case, not with arguments or accusations, but with undeniable facts. The press conference was Exhibit A. As I left City Hall, I felt a sense of calm resolve. The emotional, Messy part of the confrontation was still to come, but the foundation was laid. I was no longer the defenseless teenage boy being ridiculed at the Thanksgiving dinner table. I was a man who had built an empire in silence. And tonight, for the first time, I was going to let them see it. After the press conference, I returned to my quiet office at Vanguard Holdings. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a cold, clear sense of purpose. It was time to make the call. I didn't call my father, he was too volatile. I didn't call Leo. I couldn't trust a word he said. I called my mother. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Christopher, your father told me, I don't understand what's happening." "I know you don't, Mom," I said, keeping my tone gentle but firm. "And that's why we need to talk. All of us, face to face. I don't think your father is in any state to." "He'll be there," I interrupted, leaving no room for argument. "I've booked a table for 4 at the Metropolitan tonight. 8 o'clock. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. The Metropolitan was the most exclusive, most expensive restaurant in the city. A place my parents had only ever talked about, a symbol of a world they felt was far beyond their reach. A single dinner there would cost more than their monthly mortgage payment used to. "The Metropolitan?" she stammered. "Christopher, we can't possibly afford that." "You don't have to," I said. "It's my treat. Think of it as a family meeting. There are some things you all need to understand. Important things." She was quiet for a moment. I could hear the confusion and fear in her silence. She was a woman who had spent her entire life avoiding confrontation, and I was summoning her to the biggest one of her life. "All right, Christopher," she finally said, her voice small. "We'll be there." "Good," I said. "And don't worry about driving. I'll have a car pick you up at 7:30. I hung up before she could protest. I then made a call to my personal driver, James. "James," I said, "tonight you'll be picking up my parents. And I want you to take the Tesla, not the sedan." The Tesla Model S was another one of my quiet luxuries. A sleek, powerful machine that represented everything my old Toyota Camry did not. It was another piece of the puzzle, another crack in the facade they had built around me. Everything was in place. The public validation, the opulent setting, the dramatic entrance. It might have seemed cruel, but I knew my family. Words alone wouldn't be enough. They wouldn't understand the scale of my world unless they were forced to experience it firsthand. Tonight wasn't just going to be a dinner. It was going to be an education, and class was about to begin. At 7:30 p.m. sharp, a gleaming, pearl-white Tesla Model S purred to a stop in front of 124 Maple Street. James, my driver, a consummate professional in a sharp black suit, stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. From my own car parked down the street, I watched them emerge from the house. My father's face was a thundercloud of resentment and confusion. My mother looked nervous, clutching her purse like a life raft. Leo just looked annoyed, as if this was all a massive inconvenience. Their expressions changed when they saw the car. My father stopped dead in his tracks. He knew cars. He appreciated fine machinery. He stared at the Tesla, then at James, then back at the car. The pieces weren't fitting together in his head. Leo's jaw was slack. This wasn't the world of the failure son they knew. James greeted them with a polite, "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, Mr. Leo, Mr. Christopher sent me to collect you." They got into the car in silence. The smooth, silent acceleration as James pulled away from the curb only added to their disorientation. I arrived at the Metropolitan a few minutes before them. The valet, who knew me by name, greeted me with a warm, "Good evening, Mr. Vance." The maitre d', a distinguished Frenchman named Francois, met me at the door. "Christopher, my boy, pleasure. Your usual table is ready. It has the best view tonight." "Thank you, Francois," I said, shaking his hand. "My family will be joining me shortly. It's their first time here. Then we shall make sure it is a memorable evening," he said with a knowing smile. I was seated at a large, circular booth in the corner, with a panoramic window that overlooked the entire city skyline. And there, right in the center of that glittering tapestry of light, stood a building that scraped the clouds, with a single elegant word lit up in blue at its peak. Vanguard. When they arrived, Francois personally escorted them to the table. Their faces told the whole story. They looked around at the hushed elegance, the quiet clinking of silverware, the other patrons dressed in expensive suits and evening gowns. They were completely out of their element. This was a world they had only seen in movies. My father looked at me, then at Francois, who pulled out my mother's chair for her. "They know you here?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "I'm a regular," I said simply, gesturing for them to sit. They sat down, stiff and awkward. A waiter immediately appeared with water and menus. My father opened his, and I saw his eyes widen as he read the prices. He snapped it shut. "This is ridiculous, Christopher. This is a waste of money." "It's not a waste if there's a purpose, Dad," I replied calmly. I let my gaze drift towards the window. "It's a beautiful view, isn't it?" They all turned to look. My mother gasped. "That building," she said, pointing. "The one that says Vanguard. Is that?" "That's Vanguard Tower," I said, meeting her eyes. "My headquarters. I own the top 10 floors. My main office is right up there." I pointed to the penthouse level, a beacon of light against the dark sky. "The one with all the lights on." I watched as the reality hit them, a slow, rolling shockwave. My father stared at the building, his mouth slightly agape. Leo looked like he'd been punched in the gut. All the sarcasm, all the condescension, was gone, replaced by a raw, naked disbelief. I had brought them to the top of the mountain to show them just how small their world was, and just how vast mine had become. The appetizers hadn't even arrived, and already, the main course, the truth, was being served. The waiter came and took our order. I ordered for the table, choosing the chef's tasting menu and a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. My father didn't protest. He just sat there, silent, staring at the tower with my name on it. Once the waiter was gone, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. The time for games was over. "You're right, Dad," I began, my voice quiet but carrying across the table with unnerving clarity. "This dinner is expensive, but I consider it an investment in the truth. Because it seems there are a few things you all have misunderstood for a very long time." I looked at my father. "You think I'm a failure. The text you sent me last night made that perfectly clear. You think I'm a disappointment who needs to face the real world. So let's talk about the real world." I took a sip of water. 3 years ago, the real world was about to crush you. Your lawyer was preparing the bankruptcy filings for Vance and Son. You were over $200,000 in debt to suppliers. You defaulted on an equipment loan, and the IRS was threatening to place a lien on all your assets for unpaid payroll taxes. The bank was foreclosing on the house. Is that the real world you were talking about? My father's face went pale. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "A company called Vanguard Holdings bought your mortgage and settled your debts," I continued, my voice like ice. "It paid the $90,000 you owed to lumber suppliers. It paid the $40,000 for the backhoe. It paid your $23,000 tax bill. And then, a few weeks later, a man named Mark Henderson, the CEO of Henderson Manufacturing, called you out of the blue and offered you the biggest contract of your career, saving Vance and Son. You told everyone at Christmas it was a miracle." I let the words hang in the air. "It wasn't a miracle, Dad. It was me. I own Vanguard Holdings. I own Vanguard Tech. Mark Henderson is on my board of directors. I asked him to give you that contract as a personal favor." My mother let out a small, choked sob. "Christopher, why wouldn't you tell us?" I turned my gaze to her, and for the first time, my voice softened with a flicker of old pain. "Why? Because every time I tried to share my life with you, it was thrown back in my face. Because at every holiday, I had to listen to you and Dad praise Leo for closing a small deal while I was closing billion-dollar mergers you knew nothing about. Then I looked at my brother. My voice turned hard again. And then there's you, Leo." He flinched, refusing to meet my eyes. "You knew," I said, the words like chips of stone. "You knew I owned the house. You knew I was helping. But you couldn't stand it, could you? You couldn't stand the thought of your failure little brother being the one holding everything together. So you went to Dad. You whispered poison in his ear. You told him I was making a power play, trying to steal his legacy. You used his pride and his fear against him and against me, all because you couldn't handle the truth. I leaned back in my chair. The silence at the table was so thick I could feel it pressing in on me. The entire, ugly, rotten foundation of our family dynamic was laid bare on the white tablecloth between us. My father looked from me to Leo to my mother. He looked like a man who had been lost in the woods for 20 years, only to find out he'd been walking in circles in his own backyard. I looked out the window at my building, at the name Vanguard glowing in the night. I had built that. I had built all of this. And I had done it not just without their help, but in spite of their doubt. This is the moment that changes everything, I thought, a strange sense of calm washing over me, when I finally took back control of my own story. Thank you for staying with me until this point. You are amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 down below, so I know you've journeyed with me this far. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone else. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The food arrived, a procession of exquisite dishes, but no one moved. The artfully arranged plates sat untouched, growing cold in the suffocating silence. The sounds of the restaurant, the distant laughter, the clink of glasses, seemed to be coming from another world. At our table, time had stopped. My father looked old. It was the first time I had ever seen him look truly defeated. The arrogance, the bluster, the unshakable certainty that had defined him my entire life had all evaporated, leaving behind a frail, confused man. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he possibly say? It was my mother who broke the silence. A single tear rolled down her cheek, then another. She wasn't making a sound, just a quiet, continuous stream of tears. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it felt ancient. We didn't know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You didn't want to know?" I replied, my voice softer now, devoid of the hard edge it had held before. There was no victory in this, only a profound sense of loss for the years we could never get back. It was easier to believe I was the problem than to admit Dad's business was failing. It was easier to accept Leo's version of success than to try and understand mine. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was a gravelly rasp. "The money. You paid it all?" "Yes," I said. "And the house? It's really yours?" "It has been for 3 years." He shook his head slowly, not in denial anymore, but in sheer, uncomprehending awe. He looked over at Leo, and for the first time, I saw not pride, but a flicker of contempt in his eyes. Leo squirmed in his seat. He finally looked up, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Chris, I'm sorry," he stammered. "I was jealous. I saw you with all this, and Dad still. He still looked at me like I was the hero. I didn't want to lose that." It was a pathetic, selfish confession, but it was also the most honest thing he had ever said to me. It wasn't about me at all. It was about his own insecurity, his terror of losing his place as the golden boy. I just nodded. I didn't have the energy to be angry at him anymore. He was just a sad, frightened man in a suit he couldn't afford, who had almost destroyed his family to prop up his own fragile ego. The silence returned, heavier this time, filled with the weight of everything that had just been said. The truth was a wrecking ball, and it had just swung through the center of our lives, leaving nothing but rubble behind. There were no more secrets to hide behind, no more lies to tell. There was only the wreckage, and the 4 of us, sitting in the ruins. I signaled for the waiter and asked for the check. The meal, untouched, was a testament to the evening's true purpose. This was never about food. It was about a reckoning. As the waiter processed my card, I laid out the new terms of our relationship. My voice was calm, the voice of a CEO outlining a new corporate policy. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, looking at each of them in turn. You can continue to live in the house. I'm not going to throw my own parents out on the street. The retirement fund I set up is still in your names. When you're ready to downsize, the money is there for you." I paused, letting them absorb the grace I was offering. Then came the conditions. "But things are going to be different. This dynamic, the one where I am the family disappointment and the emotional punching bag, is over. It ends tonight. Our relationship, if we are to have one, will be built on respect. Not on my bank account, but on mutual basic human respect. You will speak to me as an equal, as a son, not as a problem to be solved or a failure to be pitted." I turned to Leo. "And you will find your own way. You can stay at Vance and Son, but your free ride is over. You're going to have to earn your place for real this time. The company has a board now, and I'm the chairman." Leo's face went white. I signed the bill, leaving a generous tip. Then I stood up. "I've arranged for the car to take you home," I said. "I'm going to walk." My mother looked up, her eyes pleading. "Christopher, don't go. Please, let's talk more." "We've said enough for one night, Mom," I replied gently. "You all have a lot to think about." I walked away from the table without looking back. I could feel their eyes on me as I left the opulent dining room and stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights seemed brighter, clearer. It felt like I had just shed a skin I had been wearing for 29 years. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I felt light. The burden of their expectations, the weight of their disapproval, the exhausting effort of hiding myself. It was all gone. For the first time, I was completely and utterly free. I didn't know if our family could be rebuilt, but I knew that whatever happened, I would be okay. I had finally saved the one person I needed to save all along, myself. The next 6 months were the quietest, most peaceful period of my adult life. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange and unfamiliar calm. There were no late-night angry texts, no strained, obligatory phone calls. There was just silence. And in that silence, I began to build a life that was truly my own, not one lived in reaction to my family. Vanguard Tech closed the biggest deal in its history, a partnership with a global logistics firm that sent our valuation into the stratosphere. We celebrated not with a lavish party, but with a company-wide bonus and an extra week of paid vacation for every single employee. Watching the joy on my team's faces gave me a satisfaction far deeper than any number on a balance sheet ever could. I started taking weekends off. I hiked. I read books that had nothing to do with technology. I reconnected with old college friends who had known me before the money, friends who liked me for my bad jokes and my encyclopedic knowledge of sci-fi movies. One sunny Saturday, I drove out to the cemetery. It was something I did a couple of times a year. I found the simple granite headstone I was looking for, Professor Albright, my mentor at Stanford. He was the one who, after seeing my dorm room project, had pulled me aside and said, "Mr. Vance, don't let anyone, and I mean anyone, ever tell you that your ideas are foolish." He'd invested the first $10,000 in my fledgling company. He passed away from a heart attack just a year before Vanguard went public. He never got to see what it became. I cleared a few stray leaves from his headstone. "Well, Professor," I said softly to the quiet air, "we did it. It got a little messy along the way, but we did it." I told him about the city contract, about the new partnership. I told him how I finally stood up to my father. It felt good to say it out loud, to share the victory with the one person who had always believed in me. As I drove home, with the sun setting in my rearview mirror, I realized something profound. My need for my father's approval, the deep, aching void I had been trying to fill my whole life, was gone. I hadn't replaced it with money or success. I had filled it myself with self-respect. I had become my own source of validation. The peace I felt wasn't because my family had changed. It was because I had. I no longer needed them to see me. I could finally see myself. Just when I had settled into this new, peaceful existence, they began to reach out. The attempts were clumsy, tentative, like people learning a new language. The first was a text from my father. Came on a random Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't angry or demanding. It was just a link to a news article about Vanguard Tech's new logistics contract. Below the link was a single, short sentence. "This is very impressive. We are proud of you." I stared at the word "we." It was the first time he had ever said it. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. I texted back a simple, "Thank you." A few weeks later, my mother called. She didn't try to smooth things over or pretend nothing had happened. Her voice was hesitant, fragile. She told me Leo had moved out. He had quit his job at Vance and Son and had taken an entry-level position at another construction firm across town. He said he needed to build something on his own, she said, a note of wonder in her voice. Then, she took a shaky breath. "Christopher," she said, "there's something I should have told you. Something I was too ashamed to admit." She confessed that she had known about the full extent of the financial trouble years ago. She'd seen the letters from the bank, the warnings from the IRS. She knew they were on the brink of losing everything. "Why didn't you say anything, Mom?" I asked, the old hurt a faint echo in my chest. "Why didn't you call me?" Her voice broke. "Because I was a coward," she whispered. "Your father's pride is so fragile. I thought telling him the truth would break him, and I was ashamed to admit to my successful son that we had failed so badly. It was easier to just hope for a miracle. And then you became that miracle, and I was still too ashamed to admit I needed one." It was the final twist, the last secret the house had been holding. Her silence wasn't just passive agreement. It was an active choice, born of pride and fear. Hearing her confess it, hearing the raw shame in her voice, didn't make me angry. It made me sad. Sad for the years she had carried that burden alone. "I understand, Mom," I said, and I meant it. The final olive branch came from Leo. It was an old-fashioned, handwritten letter that arrived in my mailbox. In it, he apologized again. Not for his jealousy, but for his weakness. He wrote, "I spent my whole life playing the part Dad wrote for me. I never stopped to think about who I actually wanted to be. Seeing you, seeing everything you built by being yourself, made me realize I hadn't built anything at all. These weren't the actions of people trying to get back in my good graces for financial gain. They were the actions of people who had been shattered and were trying to piece themselves back together into something new, something more honest. The demolition had been a success. Now maybe, just maybe, construction could begin." A year after that fateful dinner, on a crisp, golden autumn Sunday, I found myself driving down Maple Street. I hadn't planned it. My car just seemed to find its own way there, drawn by a gravity I couldn't explain. I parked across the street. The house looked the same. The giant oak tree was shedding its fiery leaves all over the lawn. The paint was peeling a little on the front porch railing, just like it always had. It looked so normal, so small compared to the war that had been waged over it. I saw my father in the front yard. He was fixing a loose board on the white picket fence. He wasn't using fancy power tools, just a simple hammer and a handful of nails held between his teeth. He moved with a slow, deliberate patience I hadn't seen in him before. He looked content. He must have felt me watching him, because he stopped, took the nails from his mouth and looked up. Our eyes met across the street. There was no anger in his gaze, no resentment. He just looked at me. Then, a small, hesitant smile touched his lips. He raised his hand in a short, simple wave. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. I crossed the street, the crunch of fallen leaves under my feet the only sound. I stopped at the gate he had just been fixing. "The fence looks good," I said. "It's always something with an old house," he replied, his voice quiet. He looked down at the hammer in his hand, then back up at me. "Your mother is making that apple pie you like." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a grand speech. It was an invitation. It was a beginning. "Yeah," I said, a real smile spreading across my face. "I'll bet it smells good." "Go on in," he said, gesturing towards the front door with his hammer. "She'll be happy to see you." I opened the gate. It swung smoothly, without a creak, and I walked into the yard, towards the house, towards a future I never thought was possible. The relationship we were building wouldn't be perfect. The cracks from the past would always be there. But it would be real. It would be honest. And for the first time, it would be a home built not on secrets and lies, but on a foundation of hard-won, beautiful, messy truth. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can build is a life of your own. Have you ever had to redraw the lines in a relationship to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what I share next.